Prime Minister Narendra Modi is on his way to the United States of America for a 3-day visit starting from today till Monday. He is expected to attend two summits, the Quad Leaders Summit, as well as the UN Summit of the Future, as well as multiple bilateral meetings and a community event in Long Island. This is Prime Minister Modi's, I believe, ninth visit to the United States of America in his more than 10 years as Prime Minister of this country. And to sort of discuss the importance and the impact of the US India ties, I have with me Ambassador Meera Shankar, who is a former Indian ambassador to the United States of America, as well as Manoj Joshi, a distinguished fellow at the Observer Research Foundation. Thank you, ma'am and sir, for joining us today. My first question, and I'd like to start with Ambassador Shankar. In the last 10 years, we've seen multiple visits by Prime Minister Modi to the US. He has dealt with Presidents Obama, Trump, Biden, and potentially a Trump or a Harris presidency starting from January this year. So I just want to understand that this visit is potentially his last visit with President Biden in the US. So I want to get a sense of the trajectory of our relationship over the last 10 years and how much of what has been built will continue regardless of the next administration that is expected to come in January.
Look, one fact, in terms of the India-US relationship is that, it has been built by administrations from both the main parties in the United States. It started with President Bill Clinton, this reassessment of the relationship between India and the US, then acquired momentum under George Bush Jr. with the nuclear deal. Then under President Obama, the strategic partnership was taken to the next level because we were given major defense partner status. And then President Trump passed the strategic trade authorization category 1, which put India on par with NATO allies for purposes of defense and high technology exports. So, and then you see the process being further consolidated under Joe Biden with the launch of the initiative on critical and emerging technologies and the agreement for the first time to co-produce the F414 jet engine between GE and HAL. The detailed agreement is still being worked out, but it's almost ready. And this would be a first. And the raising of the Quad to the summit level. So you've seen that administrations from different political persuasions have built a relationship. And for the US, I think China has emerged as a major strategic competitor. And on this, there is a consensus between Democrats and Republicans that they do not now see China as a benign player in the international system. They see it as a strategic competitor, but they would like to handle it in a way which is non-conflictual. Doesn't erupt into an inadvertent military conflict. So the focus has been under Biden on continuing the economic sanctions placed by Trump and strengthening alliances, building coalitions with strategic partners and allies, and putting in place institutional mechanisms in the Indo-Pacific to balance China so that, Asia isn't under the hegemony of one power. So when when Prime Minister Modi goes to the US and meets President Biden, I think it will be an opportunity to also take stock of what the Quad has achieved and to set directions for its future trajectory, as well as to take stock of what has been achieved on the bilateral level and again to set the future trajectory of US ties. I don't see the broad direction of ties changing because there is a strategic convergence in the Indo Pacific, even though there may be differences in, say, for instance, Europe over Ukraine. But in the Indo Pacific, there is a strategic convergence bringing the two countries together. But there will be differences in nuance. And this will stem more from US domestic policy obsession. Like with Trump, his desire to reinforce what he considers is a fair trading system to the US, where he wants to impose 10 to 20% tariffs on all imports coming into the US. And he says he will use that money for various domestic programs. Now, that will clearly impact India. He says he will impose higher tariffs on China. So let's see. Biden has just done that last week. He's imposed additional tariffs of between 7 to 50% on Chinese goods coming into the US, including solar panels and electric vehicles. So I think Trump's economic policies may actually trigger a wave of global protectionism and tit for tat action, which could slow down the global economy. Secondly, I think his whole policy on immigration, particularly because he's not just talking of dealing harshly with illegal immigrants, but also tightening policies on legal immigration and visas, including for students and possibly our software engineers, as we saw in the last time, would again impact us economically, particularly because our IT companies are in any case going through a period of churn with the rise of artificial intelligence and the slowdown in the Western economies. They are not booming like they were with double digit growth. Now, growth is in the mid single digits, I would say. And then, of course, at the global level, I think Trump would perhaps look at negotiations to end the war with Ukraine. Kamala right now is saying she will continue the present US policy. I think that is to be expected till the presidential elections are over. We have to wait and see how long the US sustains the present policy post elections, irrespective of whether it's a Trump or Kamala presidency. I think that the Democrats may also at some stage start taking a more realistic view, perhaps 6 months to a year after the election. So that is something we have to be prepared for. On Gaza, Qatar would continue supporting Israel to defend itself, but would put more pressure for a ceasefire and hostage deal and leading to eventual discussions of a two-state solution if it happens. Netanyahu so far has resisted such pressure and is expanding the war into Lebanon and into Iran with selective action. Uh, Trump would probably give a free hand to Israel to finish Gaza. So it could lead to a fairly dangerous situation in West Asia, depending on how far the conflict threatens to expand. Overall, as I said, you're going to see the trajectory of relations continue because for the US, India is a very important partner in this whole Indo Pacific rebalancing game. And for India, the US is the partner for both our economic development and growth and for building shaping an Asian balance, which is not so tilted in favor of one country dominating the continent. Yes, there are question marks about whether Trump would continue the initiative on critical and emerging technologies, and also the emphasis on defense co-production, because in the past he slowed down the defense technology and trade initiative, didn't hold meetings for almost 2 years, uh, basically saying, why should we help to build production facilities in other countries? We should not be exporting. So I don't say he will pull back, because American companies will also have their say. But it raises a question.
Right. And these political challenges of a Trump or a Harris presidency, I think, will be anchored by bilateral challenges. And here I'd like to bring in Mr. Joshi. It's been almost 10 months since the US Justice Department indicted an Indian citizen. And we keep hearing the case of this alleged plot against Gurpatwant Singh Pannu, an Indian designated terrorist. And just a few days ago, he's filed a civil lawsuit where a court has issued summons against our national security advisor and a former RNAW chief. So, how much of these bilateral challenges, especially around Pannu, would sort of, remain or impact the India-US ties going forwards?
I don't think there would be very significant impact. Already, through the last 1 year, there have been discussions between the two sides. U.S. officials have come and talked to the Indian side. The Indian side has said that we have set up a high-level committee which is looking into all this. There have been also reports in the media that the Indian side has told the Americans that this was a kind of this is not Indian policy, that this was a one-off rogue operation. Now the question is that the US side will expect that the Indians deal with this legally. So now the ball is very much in India's court, where we have to see that if we say that this is a rogue operation, what do we do about it? So unless we are seen to be doing something, so some kind of what should I say, between India and the US, we need to be seen to be doing something. I think even the US ambassador Garcetti has said that this will not impact directly on bilateral relations. So if it is true that this was a one-off rogue operation, then things are okay. And I think that whatever it is, there was an element of overreach in that Pannoon operation. But the danger is that there is a person under arrest in the US and he is on trial. Now, how much pressure is put on him, how much he reveals or does not reveal, or what the consequences will be, are still very difficult to forecast. Because the American legal system is now into this whole process, because Pannu has filed this case, against the Indian officials. So there could be a wild card there, which could be troublesome. But as I said, that as far as the bilateral relationship is concerned, I think that part of it has been fixed through the discussions between the two sides, between high-level US officials who have come to India and discussed this issue with their counterparts. So I don't think it should be a major problem.
If I may add, Pannoon used to file such cases regularly, even when I was ambassador there, against visits by Congress leaders, implicating them, in some of the Sikh riots and so on. So every time I would just check with the US State Department, and they would say, no, if they are members of the Indian government, they will join immediately. So they would visit. What I'm saying is this is part of what I call bag of nuisance.
Got it. Understood, ma'am. And so,
But more serious is the case which the US Department of Justice has been launching. That would be, if it proceeds. But I think if the Indian government is able to take, I think, even some selective action, I'm sure that nobody will expect, but they do want some degree of accountability.
Right. And the next question I have, ma'am, and this is something larger because from the Quad, it's President Biden who raised it to the leaders summit level. This is his final Quad summit. Prime Minister Kishida, who's been a good friend to India, this is his last Quad summit. So I just want to understand, how much of a buy-in is there for Quad to remain at this serious level of sort of strategic conversations, going forward in the next administration? Because if we look at the history of Quad, it's been quite spotty on this. So, now how would it go forward?
I think the global situation has moved on from the time that, the Quad was a bit iffy and people were hesitant to make commitments in view of China's opposition to Quad. Now, as I said, both parties in the US see China as a strategic competitor. So it's a shift from the way they used to look at China as an economic opportunity in the global system to one where they are seeing it as a strategic competitor which uses unfair means to swamp their economies, if you will, in terms of exports. Uh, Two, I think that Japan and Australia have had their own issues with China, as has India, because Chinese policy, which was earlier under Deng Xiaoping and successive leaders to lie low and keep a low profile internationally, under Xi Jinping, it has become very assertive. In fact, for a period of time, they were engaging in what they call wolf warrior diplomacy, which was very aggressive and combined with military action to unilaterally assert their control in their claimed maritime zone, which conflicts with claims from other countries, or on their claimed areas along the line of control with India. So I think Chinese aggressive behavior has given all countries cause for pause. And therefore, I would see that there would be a buy in, irrespective of which party comes to power in Australia. In fact, in Australia, you could say the Labour Party was supposed to be perhaps a little less committed than the Conservative Party on this strategic competition with China, but that's not the case. And you've seen a buy-in from Australia under Labour leadership, and I'm sure in Japan, because if you've seen the news in the last 2 3 days, a Chinese ship has again intruded into Japanese waters. They have been periodically intruding across the median line in the Taiwan Straits and engulfing Taiwan with both jet fighters as well as maritime naval ships. So I think that there is a greater recognition of the destabilizing impact that China's aggressive posture is having on the entire region.
Right. And that sort of also then brings me to my last question. And sir, if I'd start with you, we've seen this sort of evolution of ties where, India, and as ma'am had said, there's the starting of co-production of defense ties, this idea of, bringing India towards the US strategic sort of position. And then we have Russia and India, right? And we're still very close with Russia when it comes in terms of defense ties. So how do we see, going forward, the Indian diversification of its defense production, its defense means? Do we see, at some point, this sort of getting a further boost from this visit? Or is this sort of the strategic autonomy where we're trying to keep our feet in both sides? Is that going to continue as a part and parcel of India's sort of foreign policy direction, sir?
Well, you see, the thing is that there is a difference between the ties that we have with Russia and the ties we have with the United States. In the case of Russia, we have often been acquiring their equipment, and a lot of their equipment is now legacy equipment in the Indian Armed Forces. But the Indian Armed Forces are determined. India has made it very clear that it wishes to set up its own defense industrial base. It's working hard to create that base. And the US is playing a major role there, meaning in last year when Prime Minister Modi went to the United States, there were a number of areas where there was agreement between India and the US. For example, you had the initiative on critical and emerging technologies. You have strategic industrial cooperation between the two countries. So what the US is doing is that it is emerging as a major abettor of Indian strategic defense industrialization. Already, there are many US companies which have set up shop in India. MRO operations have been set up in India. The US has agreed to use Indian facilities for ship repair and other such activity. So there is a lot of strategic industrial cooperation going on between the two, and things like this ISET, this initiative on creative and this critical and emerging technologies. This will shape. This acts as a kind of a bridge between the government and the private sector and the businesses. So different kind of a relationship is emerging out here, where the private sector is very much involved. And India is going out of its way to encourage this private sector to play a greater role in defense industry in the past couple of years. So I think in the nature of the Indian industry is changing. So is it changing in the United States? In the United States also, there is a new Washington consensus, which is looking at reindustrialization, a new industrial strategy based on clean energy, based on semiconductors, etc. And what the US is looking for is reliable partners. And I think it sees India as a reliable partner, a reliable strategic partner in this process.
Right. And so that was sort of my last question, sir, because we've covered the US elections, we've covered Quad, we've covered challenges such as Panoon and the defense ties. So on that note, thank you so much for joining the print, Mr. Joshi, as well as Ambassador Shankar. And do subscribe below for more such news and analysis. Thank you, sir.